Well, in keeping with the post-Computex time frame, case season continues. All the stuff you see at Computex usually takes about this 4 or 5 months delay to actually make it to market. So that's why it feels like there's all these cases coming out, because that's what Computex usually is. Just case tech. Anyway, today we're gonna take a look at the Montech, not case tech, but the Montech King 45 Pro, which is what, 80% smaller?
18.
Oh, 18. I was like, that doesn't math up. Okay.
It's the little red
Yeah,
case.
okay.
All right, and action.
So today we're taking a look at the King 45 Pro from Montech. Not Case Tech, but Montech. You know, I'm starting a brand now. It's called Case Tech. Okay, anyway. It's the King 45 Pro. It's 18% smaller than the King 95. You know, missed opportunity. They should have called it the King 47.5, because that's half of 95.
So Jay likes boats.
USS Fletcher, torpedoes, and agility.
No. He really likes boats.
I'm the Bismarck, I shoot big guns. Oh no!
He really likes boats.
The IJN Yamato, the true fear in the Pacific.
And when he's not playing with his boats, he is building his boats.
Done.
And when he's not building those boats, he's playing with those boats. Online, in World of Warships.
This year marks 250 years of the United States Navy, and World of Warships is celebrating this incredible milestone with one of their biggest events ever, the US Navy 250th Anniversary Celebration. From now through the end of the year, you can build your very own Liberty Harbor, an interactive naval base packed with missions, history, and awesome rewards. Upgrade facilities, send ships on expeditions, and earn naval base supplies to unlock epic prizes, including the brand new Tier 8 Premium Cruiser Bridgeport. Free by just playing. New to the game, we'll use invite code STEPUP250 when you sign up on PC to instantly get 20 days of premium account time, the US Tier 3 Cruiser St. Louis, a port slot, and a commander. Plus access to missions that can score you the US Tier 7 Cruiser Boise, 7 super containers, and 40 million credits and more. And for returning players, rejoin the fight and claim special rewards available only during this event. Tackle Liberty Harbor missions to collect valuable items and dive back in with fresh ships and content. So whether you're a new recruit or a seasoned commander, set sail today to celebrate 250 years of naval power in World of Warships.
Join the fight and build your legacy at worldofwarships.com.
So yeah, he really likes boats.
Yeah.
So this is actually quite a bit smaller than the 95 Pro. It's still a pretty standard dual chamber design, which has really become like the norm, I guess. And I think the industry, and by the industry I mean consumers of cases right now, especially the enthusiasts, I think they're hungry for something different than the constant dual chamber fish tank. But, you know, it's kind of hard to argue with the convenience of dual chamber because you have so much room for activities. Not only that, it really frees up the case not having to be as tall because you've traded height for width. Now, obviously that, what?
Wait.
Why is there a ream of paper in our box? Anyway, what I started to say, actually I kind of forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah, you trade height for width. Now that creates a little bit of, what the? Wait a minute.
What is happening?
Hold on. Wow, that's a first. Okay. Oh my God.
Oh my god!
I have like PTSD right now. My hands are still tingling. Okay, that might have been the biggest shock I've gotten in a while. So, the King 45 to PC case, right? Yeah, wow.
Best review ever.
I felt that shock to like my elbow.
I felt that shock. It was so loud.
All right, so for shipping purposes, it has this tape that's on there. Oh, I like that the tape is like also peeling off the peel of it. Let's just do that. Okay. Ow, damn, I'm still getting shocked. What the? That's shocking. So it has a curved glass in the front, but it's only curved to the edge right here. It's not like a single piece of glass. But I do like the little details like curves and stuff in glass now because the sharp edges like just looked bad in my opinion. So the little bits of curve, even though there's a seam right there, gives it a little bit nicer feel to it. Which is kind of exciting because Montech, when we first found them, was like one of the cheapest brands we had seen at Micro Center. We found them at Micro Center first, and they were like $35, $40 cases, right? But they have been able to continue, this is looks like a 4 mil thick glass, potentially, maybe it's 3 mil. They continue to really challenge and push the envelope on what they can offer at their price points. Now, to be fair, their price points have risen as well with the quality. So although this is a like dual chamber-ish and a half design, it's kind of like a hybrid. So you can see it is a updraft style cooler. The fans are actually mounted at an angle, so it is sort of pushing the air more towards the glass. That way the GPU can use what it needs. And what the GPU doesn't need, it's gonna just sort of bypass off the glass up towards the CPU. Because it is fully updraft. There are no front fans and there are no motherboard tray fans. So that's one of the areas where it differs quite a bit already from just the traditional dual chamber design. But you can see the power supply mounts right here. So we have ourselves kind of this, that's why I'm calling it a hybrid design, because it's sort of dual chamber in the areas where it needs it, but otherwise it allows it to keep the width from getting too crazy. Porosity on that looks to be maybe a little bit greater than 50%, but look, it can just right through it. See that? Without much pressure. I know it's not the most scientific thing, but look at that. So I don't have a way to measure the porosity, like with something that fine. My calipers don't go that small, but I'm gonna say it feels like it's greater than 50%, meaning more than 50% of the space is open versus blocked off by the mesh metal itself. Now that Snoop Dogg has been here, let's turn the air conditioner back on. Now back to the insides of the case right here. This is the King 45 Pro, so the only difference is it comes with these 4 RGB fans. These are reverse blade down in the bottom. I'm not a fan of the sticker. The sticker looks cheap to me with the little RGB logo around there. I feel like that cheapens the look a little bit, personally. The fan blades are very, very light, but it's a $20 premium for these 4 fans, which is making them essentially $5 a piece. It's $100 for the King 45 and $119.99 for the King 45 Pro, which comes with these 4 fans. So like I said, about $5 a fan. Now the front glass is a structural piece, so when I pop this forward, the top is gonna become a little bit more flimsy. I mean, it's not terrible, but I would just keep that in mind. Like, when as soon as you take the front glass out, it's gonna make it easier, I guess, to build in, kinda. This isn't really getting in the way of anything because your PC will be over here. Graphics card obviously would go right here. So I guess you can take it out during building if you want, but just be mindful of this right here. That way you're not accidentally putting too much weight on this and then you're bending it down. The top panel, as you can see, can house 140 millimeters or 120 millimeter fans. You can fit a 360 up to 84 millimeters thick on the top for like a custom loop, because it is so offset from the motherboard that it's not going to impact on the motherboard VRMs or heat sinks or anything like that. And part of the reason for that is because of the PSU shroud right here. It's so recessed back that you have a lot of height before you would even come anywhere near hitting the 120 millimeter mounts right there. Now looking at the top, we've got something really interesting here that I like. These holes right here, that's obviously your power supply. You've got your extension cord right here. So obviously you need to make sure whatever power supply you're using isn't like a 1300 watt or greater that uses the custom plug. Not all 1300 watts have this, but 1500 watt and 1600 watt for sure will. That's to make sure that you're not running a lower gauge cable like this on something that can pull a lot more current through it. That way you're not melting the cable. So as you can see, because this is intended to plug into the back of the power supply, because it relocates your, it's on the back side right now, but it relocates your power supply input cable from the wall. Obviously you need to make sure that you're using a power supply cable that is compatible with that. So I just want to point that out. That's the only downside with any of these cases that use a non-traditional mounting for a power supply, because you're stuck with these, and this is a fairly thin cable. So I would say this would probably be fine for 1000 watts, 1200. I'd maybe be a little concerned with on the gauge of this. This is pretty neat right here. This gives us an area to be able to move our cables for like our EPS, any potential RGB headers, any fan cables. So even if the system's fully installed and you forget like, oh man, I didn't plug in my stuff, you can still get to it. And you'll notice by looking inside, it's actually at about a 45-degree angle. So you're not putting these crazy bends on like the EPS where you have to like It's like you could bring it up through there technically if you wanted to wrap it back behind. This would be for like fan headers and RGB headers. It's a little tight for an EPS, but it makes this natural curve up to that hole rather than it being on the same plane where you have the motherboard EPS and then it has to make this full loop back and then down. It just has to loop up, and then it can have plenty of room in here to run along there and then down to your any of your other cable management channels and such. So I think that that's pretty nice. I like seeing that. Little things like this is what starts to separate brand companies, because let's face it, there's only so many ways you can invent the rectangle. You do get some straps that you can hold down right here for like Velcro straps for your power supply cable and whatnot. Built-in hub on the backside. So we still do have space for one more, or actually two more fans and one more ARGB header. The reason why we only have one more ARGB header versus two, even though there's 4 fans and 6 ports on there, is one of those is being taken up by the case lighting right here on the front. So keep that in mind. If you wanted to put in another 2 fans somewhere up top maybe, you'll have to use an ARGB splitter. But you need to be mindful too of how many RGB devices you're plugging in, because you only have so many LEDs, individual LEDs that are addressable per channel. And then we've got this swing away door right here, captive screw. This gives us access to mounting any of our devices really. It could be SSDs, 3.5-inch drives, maybe RGB controllers. All right, in the accessories box here, we get 2 extra mushroom tab connectors for the side panels and such. A few extra standoffs, obviously our motherboard screws, some zip ties, some fan screws, PSU screws. Yeah, so a mixture of 6/32 M3 zip ties and obviously the hold down, or the standoff head, if you will. All right, obviously if you look at the back side of this too, does this just come straight up? Yes, okay, so if you look at the back side, you can see by all these cutaways here, it obviously supports back to front style motherboards, which is nice to see. That's like the standard now. If you're not not the motherboard style itself, but the cases, if you're not supporting that, which is gonna probably become a more prevalent future looking motherboard design for most manufacturers, I feel like most people might start to resort to back to front, where the cables literally, or the headers literally pass through the back of the motherboard, just because it's so ultra clean. Like it's hard to deny how clean it looks. Like old school guys like me still like to get custom cables with sleeve colors and all that and turn the cables into a part of the build. But once you see a build that has no cables showing on the front at all, now right now the only brand that you can achieve that with is Asus, because Asus has done that also with their graphics cards, where you can have like on the 5090s and 4090s, the actual power is supplied by the motherboard, which passes straight through. So then there's no cables at all. No SATA, no 3-pin or 4-pin headers for ARGB, regular RGB, fans, it all passes through the back. So there would be 0 wires showing in the front. We've got obviously our front side connectors here, which is the pretty standard assortment of USB-C, USB 3, HD audio, unified front panel connector header, which is funny because everything's unified now, but building the retro system, that stuff's wasn't unified back then. So I have a new appreciation for the unified connectors that everyone's sort of quietly moved to without it being a quote unquote standard. So much more appreciated. We've got a channel down here that we can sort of hide the cables in if we need to. As long as it's behind the motherboard, they won't show. Obviously, we got our side grommets, or our openings right here, without any rubber grommet. So any cables that you route up and down here are gonna be visible from the front. Again, here's our power supply. So that's just a bracket that you attach to your power supply itself, mount that on the power supply, and then you've got these tabs right here that just groove in right there. And then you push it forward, and then these 2 screws, these thumb screws, will lock down the power supply. This is all the pre-installed fans. Obviously, this is a feed for the hub for the ARGB that plugs into your motherboard. This is your 4-pin feed for the PWM signal to control the fans, and then SATA power to power the hub itself. And then down here, it's not the prettiest because you can see all the cables. So this is like my biggest gripe about this case right now, is you can make this prettier by giving, see how these are running through that hole and everything else is going through that hole? So for like cable management, I would have rather those all go together, because then you could have bundled them up nice and tight and at least have one, cable bundle going through. And as long as you push these down nice and flat and maybe zip tie these with like the USB-C on top, you could make that look a little bit cleaner. But depending on the length of your motherboard, obviously ATX motherboards are gonna come all the way down and cover most of that. This right here is fully visible, so I would wanna clean that up. I don't think this looks great from the factory at all. And then right here, you can see we have our GPU anti-sag bracket, which is built in. Speaking of GPU and coolers, for fitment, you can fit a power supply that's up to 180 millimeters long, get 187 millimeters of cooler height for your tower coolers, which means all your like Noctua NH-D14s and your Dark Rock Pros and all that stuff will fit. And then graphics card, it'll fit up to 435 millimeters in length. So your Strixes and your Aorus Masters and all that are gonna fit in this, no problem whatsoever. And then obviously with this being a bottom feed, you're going to be feeding your graphics card fresh air from the bottom. Now speaking of fresh air from the bottom, you can see on the business end, the side you would be seeing, because this would be a right-sided PC, it's fairly solid right here. It's just a thin piece of plastic. You got the feet. It's fairly solid on the front side because this is where your buttons are on the bottom. Power, reset. I think that might be reset. It might be RGB control. I'm not entirely sure. You got your unified headphone jack, 2 USB 3 and your USB-C, but on the back, you can see it's open quite a bit more to bring in fresh air. So we'll do some smoke testing on this today because I'm curious as to how much air would actually make it through the front. But this is a pretty big opening in the back. So as long as you're not choking it off too badly, and then your filter is just a magnetic, but it comes out from that side as well. So that's pretty much it for the walk around. I'm gonna throw our standard case testing parts in here and we'll see what nuances we find along the way. All right, so it's fully built. Yes, that button on the front does control the RGB lighting from the controller. It can also be controlled by the motherboard itself. I'll be honest, it was a pretty solid build. We'll talk about the cable management. I'll show you some more detailed shots of some little things I found while building along the way that are like, oh, that's a really nice feature they added. A couple areas too where I feel like they missed an opportunity or two that maybe wouldn't have been very expensive to implement, but would be nice for maybe a V2 or revision of this case. Yeah, so this is running the standard config, which has the 3120 intakes on the bottom. They're hooked up to the motherboard. Actually, no, they're hooked up to their controller, but the controller's hooked up to the motherboard, and they're hooked up to the chassis 3 header at the bottom of the motherboard because the Noctua Chromax is being controlled by the CPU header. So they'll speed up and slow down technically with CPU logic. And since the CPU is sitting at idle, there is a full system installed on this. They're running pretty low RPM, but that's good for the smoke test. That way it's not throwing the velocity so high you can't tell where the motion is going. I will say this though, I would prefer to have at least one more fan in here and exhaust as well on the top. That way any of the heat that makes its way to the top above the movement of these fans here is not just sort of building and dealing with convection, just assists to get the heat out faster, right? We have 3 intakes. 2 exhaust is not going to create a negative pressure, will still be positive pressure. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of things before I worry about the inside. I want to see, and I know smoke is one of those things that like, it's just a visual aid. It's not indicative of cooling capability. It's just indicative of airflow, right? So I'm curious as to how much air actually makes its way in right here on the front, because as we already talked about, on the back side right here, it's a big gap for air to come in. So like this is gonna be no surprise. That is absolutely pulling the air in, as you can see, all the way back there even, look at that. So it's obviously pulling air in, no problem. I'm just a little curious about the front side because we want to make sure we're not choking those bottom fans in any way. So let's start with the front right here. Obviously it's getting most of its airflow from the backside, which is where it's also lifted up more. How about on the front right here? Okay, so it is pulling air in from right there as well. This is why having one more exhaust on the backside above the air cooler would make a lot of sense, because there's not a lot of airflow happening right here. In fact, with my hand, I can't even really feel the airflow, even though this is all updraft. Couple of reasons. One, a lot of the air is being picked up by the GPU, the front half, and shoved out the back of the GPU. The back half of that air is being picked up by the air cooler for the CPU and then shoved out the back. So up here, it's a fairly low pressure zone because there's no assisted air movement up here. It's just pressure. So if I just load this up with smoke, do you see how fast it is moving out the back versus the top? See here, it's just sort of naturally rising, and even having an opportunity to sort of just hover there. Look at that. There's not a lot of pressure on the top right there. But as you can see by the rear fan, clearly there's plenty of airflow there. Now on the back side, you can see the power supply right there. I used the Montech power supply, which has a silver cover on it. So you can see obviously how much of it is being covered versus the whole chamber right there. So you can see the power supply clearly pulling in right there and exhausting out the top. Look at that, right? And then right here, it's totally neutral right there. And then the fans on the bottom are having enough intake pressure that it's pulling it down. Phil and I were just talking, this might be one of those cases where it actually is advantageous to have an intake way up here, like a 120 all the way forward, pushing fresh air down in front of that cooler, and then an exhaust over here to get any hot air out. Because look at, it's kind of nuts how much air the cooler is pulling in through the top. Look at that. That is, and that's going, look at that vortexing. So we've got the intakes on the bottom pulling air up, and then some of it's going around the GPU. The fans on the GPU are turning, by the way, but the GPU can only move so much CFM when the fan turning at a certain speed, so everything else goes around. But right here, you see this vortexing effect because the CPU cooler is actually causing enough pressure to pull air in through the top, and this is impacting, it's curling in front of the CPU cooler. Look at that. That is pretty crazy how much fresh air the cooler is allowed to bring in from the top. All right, so let's just look at the total airflow now as I let it intake from the bottom, because that is where most of the air is coming in, right? That is so crazy that you can see the CPU cooler pulling it in. Okay, let's take a look at the build. Let's open it up so you can see the cable management and some really neat things I found along the way. Okay, let's start with the build quality. The top piece right here, it's a little flimsy. I just want to point that out. It is just, it's metal, but because of the amount of porosity, like it's pretty flimsy. So what I noticed is that, see how it's got kind of a bow to it? So when I had snapped it into place, I noticed that the front, like glycol's all over the front now, the front corner was like lifted like that slightly. So what I had, and that's normal because when you go to pull it off, right, you pull it on the corners. So I took it off and I had to kind of like bend it back. So I just want to point out the top piece is a little flimsy. When it comes to the top panel here, you can see I've got the cable routed through there. This does overhang some of the screws, so it'd probably makes sense if you're gonna be putting a top AIO or fans or something up here, mount them down first, then plug that in, or that could potentially block some of the screws. It's not a big deal, but it's just, it's there. It's not designed to run underneath here because obviously the power supply is filling up that spot. I did reroute a couple of their fan wires because they had the one for the rear fan right here pulled so taut that it went straight across to the hole, which actually would block the motherboard would going in, but it was like twist tied down so tight, I couldn't pull any slack out of it. And there was plenty of slack. It went down and came back up. So I undid that and then I routed it instead of going through this top hole right here where the EPS is. So I put it behind the motherboard right there, which made more sense than having it go across. It's less visible that way. And I put a couple zip ties on there because the wires wanted to sort of separate themselves. Cable management on the backside is actually pretty awesome. I was worried that there wasn't gonna be a lot of space, but there's actually quite a bit of space. So let me show you here. I was able to keep all of the excess cables up underneath the power supply. Now this is a 1050 watt Montech power supply. If you're running a much longer power supply, you'll lose some of that space. But because of this solid panel right here, I didn't want to hide any wires under there in terms of bundling, because if you were going to be having drives there, they need to take up that space. So you can see I've got it still pretty wide open right there. You can see here how I ran the EPS across. And then there's a hole on the side right here. It's really kind of hard to see. That's where I ran all of the wires out of for the 24 pin and the EPS and the SATA power cable for the hub. I just ran it into there and then just shoved it down there in the bottom. And everything's still fully accessible. I can get to all of those plugs and plug something in, unplug something if I need to. Plenty of space right there. Didn't have to utilize any of this area on the bottom except for the 12 volt 2x6. Now, missed opportunity is to have a channel cover down here. So these wires are They're all kind of various lengths, and I sort of just like tucked them in there. But you can technically see those from the front side, sort of. But I think it would have just been neat to have at least a channel cover, like a snaps on or a little door or something, just to hide that. I think that it's a pretty subjective nitpick, but I do think that that would have made that area seem a little bit nicer, a little bit more premium. But look, check this out. This is where I was really happy to see this. They added this notch right there, which makes running your PCI Express cables or something there perfect, in that it's not having to make this like crazy flat, you know, smush it through and then have it twist as it goes. It can stay in its more natural shape. It's not pinched or nothing. So I was really happy to see that, to be honest. And then what you get on the other side is a much more natural cable run to the graphics card. And it's loose. When it comes to depth, you can see it clears the side panel out very nicely without worrying about pinching. This is a Founders Edition card. It's a little taller than, say, a reference would be. But if you get a really high, like a really tall graphics card in there, then it might start to get a little tight against the window. I think what we'll do before we end this video is maybe I'll throw the Astral in there and see with something that tall, how close it gets to the glass. But there's a lot of room right there. Cool thing too is if you're not running any top fans, you're just running a standard config like this, you can easily access all these wires and stuff, like to plug in the EPS and all that. Remember, this doesn't come out. It's not a frame that unbolts so you can put your AIO on and then put it in after. So your build order is going to kind of matter. You would probably want to make sure that all your motherboard devices and stuff are plugged in first at the top before you put your AIO in your fans. Otherwise, it will become harder to get to. But the cool thing is, because you've got such a large opening on the back, installing the cooler after the fact, not a problem. You can get to the brackets. It's not like some of those cases where every manufacturer of the motherboards kind of lands the CPU socket in a slightly different area. And I've had cases where the socket's like slightly overhung by the case opening, which is like, what's the point? You can't get to the other, like the side holes. There's plenty of opening there for that. I think the only way this could look cleaner, because if you look right here at like the 12 volt or the 24 pin, the USB-C and the USB 3 right there, because they shoot straight into that hole for the power supply chamber, the only way it could get cleaner, in my opinion, is to have a back to front build in this, which obviously it supports. All right, before we get out of here, let's throw an Astral in here and see whether or not it's gonna touch the glass on the side panel. I also want to point out, I wasn't even using the anti-sag. Like the frame is actually solid enough on the back that it wasn't bending and sagging, but I might need it for the Astral card. Now this is the biggest GPU I have here. There are bigger ones, but obviously there is plenty of clearance for it. Has no problems fitting in there whatsoever. Still plenty of space. Look at that. Didn't even touch a cable. Nice. And then obviously, because the power supply is facing up, it has this adapter here. We can still access turning it on and off by just removing the top cover. So all in all, a really solid $100 case. I'm calling it $100 because the only difference is I should turn that off, is the fans, right? Everything else is the same. Another thing, we're referring to the case build quality. There's a little bit of play at the bottom. Right here it's solid. It's more in the front right there. So, all right, so there you go. That's the new Montech King 45. It's an aggressive price point to be in. What I mean by aggressive is $100 to $120 seems to be where like so many cases land. So there's a lot of competition in that price point. I think that the things that they've done right make it a pretty solid build experience. And the things so far that I've had to gripe about are honestly, for me personally, not deal breakers. Like having that better channel to hide the wires is one thing, but look, once it's all put together and the lights are on and all that, you can't even see those cables at the bottom. Like it's just, this is my OCD when it comes to cable hiding and stuff, to know that they're not visible at all. But I guess they're pretty much not. So that's just really more of a nitpick. I do like the nice big flat power supply wall right there, because my brain goes, cool, you can get like a 9-inch sensor panel. Just stick it in there. I mean, who wouldn't want a 9-inch? You didn't think that was gonna be my parting words, did you? I think the best value, honestly, is to get the King 45 Pro versus the standard King if you need to buy case fans, because These are the AX120 Pros, which the difference between the PWM and the Pro, they're both RGB, but the PWM has a black blade with only a ring light. So they look exactly the same, but only the edge lighting that you see on the fan is what's included with it. The blade is black. These are the Pro, which means you have the illuminated hub and the fan blades illuminate as well. Each of these are $5, right? A $20 premium. $100 for no fans, $120 with the fans, 1, 2, 3, 4 divided by 20 is $5 a fan. These exact fans on Amazon for a 3-pack are $50, making them like what? More than $15 a fan. So yeah, it makes much more sense to simply buy they're individually they're $19.90 on Amazon. So this is a better value if you need case fans. Now, if you don't get the case fans and you're still looking for a quote unquote value, the Montech AX120M PWM that I said, which I'll show you here a photo of them, are essentially the same looking fan, they just have the edge lighting. A pack of 3 of those is $25. So yeah, it just, no matter what, it's a better value to get these fans included with it. But if you're crazy OCD like me and you're like, well, they all have to match and you're running an air cooler and you're just putting fans on top, then yeah, you're gonna definitely want to match all of your fans, which to me, even if they're slightly different, would bother me. But if you get an AIO or something on there, if you get the Montech AIOs, these fans do come on some of their AIOs. So you got some mixing and matching that you can do, and the AIO fans on top would handle the exhaust and stuff that we're talking about. But I think at the $100 price point to $120 with the fans, makes it a solid choice. Obviously, when it comes to cooling, I haven't run it through its paces yet, but I can tell you by the amount of fresh air that's coming out of this, the only thing that makes a case bad is if it cannot exchange the volume of air inside of it quick enough to keep temperatures from climbing over time, right? You get heat saturation, and if the exchange rate is too low, then the heat of the part overpowers the cooling capability of the case, and then your temperatures slowly rise and climb to a potential throttle scenario. And that is where you start to notice, like on the big data charts that you see at like Tom's Hardware and Gamers Nexus, where they have like 50 cases on a chart. The best one and the worst one are sometimes a difference of 10C. Now 10C can make or break whether or not your CPU is throttling, right? If you're at 90C and you're 10C hotter than that, now you're throttling. But if you're at like 70C versus 63C, yeah, the temperatures are lower, but you're not throttling. So you start to really get into those nuances of like, okay, this one case performs 5C better at double the cost. Now there's a lot of discussion to take place there. So it'll be interesting to see how this one lands. We're just starting to collect our data to start putting together our own charts. And it's been a fun journey to try and figure out the data points that matter. What are the impacts of the case by having this fan location, that fan location? Do we test with all the fans occupied? Do we test as they ship? So we've determined there's 2 modes of doing this. Basically filling out the fans with everything that's capable of cooling, right? What we mean by that is the fans are able to be installed. If a case comes with 0 fans, so if a case has no fans in it at all, obviously that's doing it a disservice. That just means the manufacturer expects you to put your own fans in there. They're not saying the case is designed to be run with no fans. But this is the exact hardware we use, minus the Astro, we use the 4080 Super, for our case thermal testing. This is a 13900K, that's a 4080 Super. The 13900K definitely can stress the CPU in terms of temperature, so we can see whether or not the case is causing the small amount of headroom we have to throttling, whether or not the case can stop that from happening. And the 4080 Super is definitely more realistic of a GPU to test versus a 4090 or a 5090, which such a small percentage of the population is actually running. But if it has no fans, then what do we do? Do we put some fans or do we put all fans? So we're basically testing with filling out the fan slots with their max cooling capability. And then that's the pathway I've chosen to take right there. So everyone's gonna kind of have a different approach on how they do this sorts of tests, but I'm having fun collecting the data and examining it and analyzing it and determining which data is important for you guys. So we're working on that, but we need to have obviously more than one case on a chart for it to mean something to you. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Tell me what you think about the King 45. At 120 bucks, would you go with this? Or is there a different brand or case that you've got your eye on? Sound off in the comments below, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.